Module 1. Let's name it No Athlete is the Same. Well, it sounds obvious, but yet it is a topic of enormous depth. 2 years ago, Japan Times Sport published an article called Kawaguchi Developed Unique Technique Overseas. Kawaguchi is their superstar. Masafumi Kawaguchi was the player who played in National Football League in America for many successful years, then retired and became representative director of Japan Physical Education and Culture. In this article, he reflects on his journey in rethinking and understanding of these differences from anatomical perspective between Japanese players and European. So his opening line is European and American athletes use their body in a completely different way from Japanese athletes. And from day one, he noticed the difference. So now his goal is to reshape the training programs for representatives of many sports which have similar demands in Japan. He claims that their focus is to train Japanese athletes so that they can utilize their bodies as effectively as Europeans and Americans. He started to speak particularly about the tackle in a football, which is very similar to double takedown in MMA. This is one of the very few evidences of supporting the fact that Asian athletes and coaches adapting their technique, their mechanics, their biomechanics of their technique, especially when they participate in European sports. Do we Europeans adapt or review from the same standpoint, from the standpoint of biomechanics, our technique when we participate in Asian sports, which is every and any martial arts, judo, karate, aikido? Do we? You know the answer yourself. Generations. Let's look back at the history of martial arts, or the history of its input to the Euro. For many, many years, Europeans were trying to learn judo, karate, aikido, any martial arts from Japanese, from Koreans, from Chinese. They went there to live for several months, sometimes years, to learn it from the first hand, and then eventually they imported martial arts to Europe. So what happened there? We ended up literally with copying and pasting all exercises, all drills, all school of thought, how and why we apply these exercises to the athlete. All was copied and pasted into the Western training programs. Honestly, with no or little respect to anatomical differences between Europeans and Asians. There was a huge side effect to this adaptation. You can name it yourself. It's thousands of hip replacements, knee replacements, degenerative disc diseases, traumas of spinal cord, etc., etc. On the other hand, I can hardly remember any Japanese judo player who went through that, drama. Of course, there were few, but not in such a systematic and consistent way as Europeans were suffering from side effect of these mindlessly adopted drills. Some of them, of course. The answer is very simple. The answer is in this article. There are anatomical differences between representatives of various races. Let's come back to training for MMA. We have loads of exercises borrowed from martial arts, from judo, aikido, karate, all forms of stretching, all forms of exercises. The key to success for many coaches would be mindful respect of human anatomy. And I would like to encourage you to look very carefully at all these exercises at least one more time. For example, let's take the very innocent stretching exercise, iron cross or hip crossover, Sometimes this exercise can do more harm than good. Well, the position again is very widely used in martial arts, in training, in stretching. But again, it's innocent for Asians, but it could be quite harmful for Europeans. Let's take a close look at the regions of the low back pain. Human spinal cord is designed to work under vertical compression. This is a gravity or weight of the upper body. So it is designed. For this reason, particularly in the lumbar area, in the area of low back pain, each vertebra is interlocked with the next one with the help of these tiny facets, like a latch. If you have a small latch on your door leading to your garden, this is something similar. This is done particularly for particular reason to limit mobility of the vertebra of the spinal cord, particularly in the low back area, in the low back section, to limit the ability. When the person is lying on the floor, there is no vertical pressure, so vertebrae come out of interlock, they are no more longer interlocked. Then we ask the person to make a hip crossover, or vice versa, we rotate the upper body, effect is the same, and that horizontal rotation, because vertebrae are no longer interlocked, they are disjointed now and disconnected from each other, we start to rotate them against these facets. So we damage them day by day when we and this micro injury accumulate, and one day they may result in a potential injury on the mat or anywhere else. Again, because of the different angle in the pelvis, Asian athletes can do more rotation without any damage to the facets, and actually with the help of this exercise they can achieve the good stretching for the big muscles of the back and for the leg muscles. European has less angle in the same joints in the pelvis, and that's why the detrimental effect of such a movement, horizontal rotations with unlocked vertebrals, produce the damage earlier than Japanese. However, we keep that exercise, we keep pushing our athlete to do that movement, thinking that that's the way it should be done, and that's a trigger. That's a trigger on many occasions. That's a trigger to his problems in the future. We can discuss similar situations about some drills, again borrowed from martial arts, from Japan, from Asia. Some drills about knees, about hips, but we will do it at a later stage. Let me come back to Kawaguchi. He writes, Japanese athletes tend to use their knees a lot. They bend their knees to stockpile the power and explode before the dash or lift. There's something very similar to sumo. So when they launch their bodies, when the wrestlers launch their bodies from the deep squat position. So the power runs from the knee to the hip, from the hip to the upper body. Kawaguchi noticed that Europeans or Americans, they produce the same power by using only the hips. So, and they do it much quicker as a result of them. So he identified the key element in this kinematic chain is a pelvis movement. So he created a lot of various exercises for Japanese athletes to help them to improve that kinematic chain. So he's saying many of Japanese trainers instruct to solidify the body trunk first and then move the hips. So his method is to move the body trunk itself. Now, I wouldn't go into details, but the point I'm trying to make is that we have different anatomy. We all have a different anatomy. This is what is called individual anatomical differences. In order to be a successful coach, we have to pay respect to this to these differences, and we need to see this, start to see these kinematic change in a person. So let it be the starting point in our coaching. Let us acknowledge that no student is the same. Let us acknowledge that there are anatomical differences, and we need to sometimes adapt our exercises and be very mindful and thoughtful when we ask our students to do one or the other drill. So let me touch another side of differences of anatomical differences between let's say two athletes, two people. Side asymmetry. Limbs has different length. On most occasions, one leg is shorter than the other. If you look at the picture, which will be inserted into this presentation, take a look at the thigh bone or shin bone. So it's one or the other. On the left side or on the right side normally is shorter or longer than the other one on the other side. Nothing wrong with it from the standpoint of general health. It's not detrimental to anything. For example, according to American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, 32% of recruits, military recruits in the United States, has the difference from starting from half an inch nearly to an inch. The difference in the length of their legs, and there's nothing wrong with it at all. Leg length difference is not unusual even in the high performance sport, even among the runners. There was very famous Olympian marathon runner Bill Rogers, who won 4 times Boston and New York marathon, his times. He had one leg full half inch shorter than the other. Of course, he was doing special exercises, and the obvious problem that come from length leg difference, of course, it is the stress for the muscles and for the joints that work to counteract this imbalance. Okay, let me talk about another form of asymmetry or disbalance within the human body. You may have noticed that some people keep their feet differently. Some keep them turned outwards, some keep them turned inward. Type in the Google why people keep their feet this and that way. You won't have much answers or references. Only 23,000, comparing with millions of the other subjects. Well, pediatricians would call in-toeing pigeon foot and out-toeing, when they refer to the feet that tend to turn outwards, as a penguin toed. There's nothing wrong or dangerous for the general health of a person. However, when it comes to the high performance sport, when it comes to 10-15 years of daily overloading of joints, tendons, ligaments, along the whole kinematic chain, here we may have serious problems and injuries that will start accumulating in a knock-on effect from the placement of the foot up to the lumbar area and low back pain and degenerative disc disease. Take a look at this picture, though it is in some foreign language, but however you can see the logic and the knock-on effect itself, which goes from the foot up to the very low back. Again, I make an extremely important point here. The knock-on effect can be stopped. It can be counterbalanced with inclusion of certain exercises which would level the tone or the degree of development of certain muscles. The general question: adults who keep their feet outwards are generally more flexible than people who are in-toeing. There is an explanation for that effect. However, I would like to leave that for you to discover. Why is it so? I will give you only one little hint. Take a look at the position of the baby in a womb. Notice that he starting point of development of his legs and feet is in toeing. So that's a starting point, and everything which happens later. So either he would remain in-toed, or he comes to the something in the middle, or he goes even more to out-toeing. That tells a lot about his genesis and what kind of exercises he was doing during his childhood and what actually happened to him in the first 3 months after his birth. So to resume, no athlete is the same. I would like to ask you, next time you're in your class, in a gym, take a close look at your athletes. Don't scare them with obvious observations or measurements. They just keep watching the way they walk, the way they keep their feet, the way they keep their arms as well, because there's something similar about the way they keep the toe. Either it is inwards or it's outwards. That can tell a lot about the condition of their central and peripheral nerve system, about disbalance in their body. So once you identified that disbalance in either in their arms or in their body or in their legs, try to come up with 2-3 exercises to balance the muscle tone. Obviously, then you need to start incorporating these drills in your either warm-up or during the main part of the training somehow. And then out of interest, I would like to ask you to do a very simple measurement. It's called sitting height ratio. I will submit the formula at the end of this presentation, but generally this is an index which is calculated as sitting height. Obviously, you sit on the mat and you measure the height, divided by general standing height and multiplied by 100. So it defines the percentage of the total height that is comprised by head and trunk. The remaining portion of the body will be the length of the legs. So the lower this index, the relatively longer the legs are. It can help in our further discussions at some stage and could be of some interest to you and for your athletes, because that is one of the key elements of biomechanics, the length of the legs, which produce big difference when it comes to, in our game, maybe for the low kick, for the middle kick, for any forms of kicks. And that would just be interesting to understand this individual difference of that particular athlete. So keep in mind that no athlete is the same. Keep a close eye on your athletes, and that's it for now.